We have Mr. Gray, am I correct? Yes. With Wilden doing our wastewater and water rate study. I believe he's got a quick presentation that he wants to go, as far as the information that he's compiled so far. And hopefully we're shooting for March, I think, for completion, more or less, give or take. March? So, yes. So if you want to take the lead.
Yes, thank you, Chief. Again, my name is Jason Gray. I'm a Vice President with Wildan Financial Services. We provide all sorts of financial consulting for cities and counties across the country. I'm based in Dallas, so we do a lot of these types of water wastewater rate studies throughout the state of Texas, as well as nationally. But we've done about 300 here in Texas over the past 10 years. So we've done a few. In fact, we've done a couple for San Juan in the not recent past, but several years ago. We do have a presentation for you here, as the Chief mentioned. We're not considering this necessarily a final. There is, I think, probably still some work to do on the capital improvement plan, which is a significant driver of the rate plan, and that's something that we want to talk with you about tonight. We've provided, as part of your packet and the presentation tonight, we'll walk through two different scenarios. One that essentially funds half of the identified capital improvement plan through long-term debt. That would mean the other half either needs to get funded through grants, through some other form or fashion, or it doesn't get done. And that's just an aspect that every utility has to face. Is there's the projects that you would like to get done, the projects that you need to get done, and the projects that you can afford to get done. And sometimes those three don't align. Often they don't align, unfortunately. And then the other scenario is the 100%. And so it is all of the identified capital improvement projects that we're aware of, and working with your staff, obviously, and funding all of those projects with long-term debt financing over a period of time, obviously. And so the reality is the rates that are necessary, pretty obviously, to cover half of the CIP versus all of the CIP are different. The CIP is significant. You're a growing community that's got a lot of capital improvement needs, obviously. And then there's just the ongoing cost of doing business without even building projects that also plays in a role. And so I'm going to start working through the presentation here. Please jump in with questions. The Chief mentioned brief. I'll try to be brief. However, there's a lot of information here, and I want to spend the time that you want to spend on it. So if I'm going too fast, if you need more detail, if you want me to hurry up, any of those things are just fine. Just tell me, and I'll take the direction accordingly. Maybe. There we go. We've got 5 sections here. I won't belabor the table of contents, essentially, but we'll spend a little bit of time background on rates, talk about your system specifically, go through a couple of different rate plans, and then do a quick summary. First, on water and wastewater rates, the bullets that you see up here are national trends. They are not specific to San Juan. They're not specific to the Rio Grande Valley. They're not specific to Texas. They're national trends. Average utilities have been increasing their rates to their customers at about 5 to 6% a year. We see that continuing and, in fact, very likely accelerating over the next decade or so. American Water Works Association, which is really an international group that works throughout the hemisphere, that water and wastewater rates will triple over the next 15 years. There's a variety of different factors playing into that. Capital improvement plans are a part of that, but access to water and the cost to access water, regulatory issues, it's just gotten a whole lot more expensive within the past several years to treat wastewater specifically. I have a client that I met with yesterday. They're building an expansion on their wastewater treatment plant, and it's going to be costing them $35 a gallon, essentially, in construction costs. I remember about 15 years ago, that was more like $5. And so, for it to increase sevenfold over the course of 15 years, obviously, is pretty dramatic. Rate adjustments, generally speaking, are due to factors that are outside of your direct control. When we look at what makes up your total, what we call cost of service, total cost that it takes to provide the service that you need to provide, the amount that's operations and maintenance is actually relatively small. That's the portion that you have the most control over, although there are certain things that need to be done, obviously. But you can control a little bit of staffing levels. You can control a little bit of, the variety of different ways that you do things. But at the end of the day, when it comes to capital projects, comes to access to water, and it comes to regulatory issues, those are issues that you're responding to as opposed to driving. You're just not in the driver's seat in those, and neither is anybody else, quite frankly. Those are issues that tend to impact the rate plan significantly. In fact, they're the primary drivers of the rate plan, and things, like I said, that unfortunately are outside of your direct control. 30 to 40% of utilities charge rates that don't cover their full costs of doing business. And that is just something that's important to keep in mind when you look at comparisons. There are a lot of utilities out there that are either deferring maintenance in a way that's going to cost them more in the long run, or they are subsidizing their utility rates through their tax rates. They may be subsidizing it through, just a wide variety of different ways, grants, those kinds of things, but they're not charging rates that really fully cover the whole cost. So again, just something to keep in mind as we work through this. Getting in more locally, right now, your current water and wastewater rates were adopted in 2009. So obviously they're 17 years old at this point. The fact that you've been able to maintain any sense of solvency with the same rates over 17 years is due to a couple of different things. One, you've had some growth, and that helps. That helps to produce additional revenue, and utilities are an economies of scale kind of business where there are flexion points where you have to add capacity and that costs, but once you've got excess capacity, the more of it that you can sell, the less the cost is per thousand. So that's acted in your favor. The rates, my guess is you also have some deferred maintenance that isn't getting done to have the same rate plan over the past 17 years. You have one of the lowest rates in the state and one of the lowest in the Rio Grande Valley right now, from what we can tell. Inflation, I don't have to beat that dead horse. Obviously, inflation causes all kinds of different things to go up in cost, and you know what that's been like over the past couple of years. Thankfully, it's leveling off at this point, but it still is a cost driver. The things that you buy and the people that you pay have inflationary pressures on your cost of doing business as well for the utilities.
I've noticed that the chemicals,
Yes.
that has been increasing.
Yeah.
Every time that it's been brought up to us on the agenda item for
Yeah.
approval, I noticed that chemicals is increasing
And
dramatically.
again, that's a national issue. We work, in fact, last night I was in Denver doing a similar presentation for a group that's outside of Denver. I work in Detroit. All of them are experiencing those kinds of issues, particularly with chemicals. That's the first one that always comes up because it has been increasing 15, 20% a year in costs. And again, so that's one of those things that you have to buy the chemicals. There's no question about that. And when it costs you that much more to treat per 1,000 gallons, that cost has to go somewhere. And unfortunately, it's on ratepayers, generally speaking. So, but inflation impacts all of the different aspects and components of your cost of doing business. Chemicals is a big one that is outstripping even the pace of inflation and has been for years, quite frankly. Our Detroit clients go into a very deep economic dive, and they're not growing. And so what they're looking at truly is, sort of a how much did it cost to serve essentially the same population year over year, and their chemicals cost over the past 4 years has doubled. And so, again, it's just the kind of deal where you got to look at and say, okay, something's got to give, right? Existing infrastructure that you have requires modernization, improvements to get to system optimization. New infrastructure is needed not only for the existing infrastructure, but then also for the growth that you have coming. All of those things combined, each one of those impacts the necessary rate plan in a little bit different ways, but all of them combined get to the point of where we're recommending that regardless of what scenario we end up going with, the two that are on the table tonight or something different, it's time to do something with your rates. There's not, in my opinion, probably any more years that you can continue to have the same rate plan that you did in 2009 and continue to have a utility that's effectively running the operation. So I'll just kind of state that up front, that sometimes we can get away with a year or two of not increasing rates. You've gotten away with 17, and that's again a variety of factors I'm sure playing into that, but it is time to raise the rates from our professional opinion. We'll talk just a minute here about your current water and wastewater rate structure. Your residential base charge for your 3/4 inch meters is $12.05. That's the base monthly charge that everybody pays regardless of whether they use any water through it or not. And then you have a graduated tier volume charge for both residential and commercial. You'll see on the commercial and industrial side, as the meter sizes go up, those base charges go up. That is because those larger meter sizes have a bigger impact on the system. When you are running a 2-inch or a 4-inch meter, you can pull a whole lot more water off at any given point in time off of the system, and so therefore meter charges, generally speaking, go with the size of the meter itself. Not always the case, but it's often the case, and this is how you operate as well. Again, on the volume side, you've got graduated tier on the residential and a single tier for commercial and industrial, which again is pretty typical, pretty common rate structure. The first 12,000 gallons, 2,000 gallons included in the base charge. Everything between 2 and 11,000 gallons is $1.65 for residential. Between 11 and 16,000 gallons is $2. 16 to 26 is $2.35, and that under 26,000 gallons is the vast majority of your residential use. There will be a few users that use more than 26,000 gallons, but not many. And if they do, that rate goes up to $3.10. The graduated increasing tier volume rate structure that we see here is common, and it's typical to try and drive some conservation. Water sales is kind of a funny business in the sense that you're trying to get your consumers to use less of it. And yet, if you're too successful with that, then the money doesn't come in to run the system, right? So, so you want to be a little bit careful how you balance that. We think you've got a reasonable rate structure the way that it is, just structurally speaking.
So let me ask you this, in reference to the commercial and industrial, I see that it's 190, right, all the way down.
Yes.
So, I mean, in my opinion, I think one of the first adjustments should be the commercial and industrial. I think that number should increase.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So there's two different components to thinking about the commercial industrial versus the residential. Commercial industrial can work on a graduated tiering system as well. However, it's important to recognize that they really don't have the same opportunity to conserve as residential typically does. Residential has a certain amount of use that they need to use inside the home. That's typically 6-ish thousand gallons roughly. Everything else typically is outside the house in irrigation. Some of that may be necessary. Most of it is an aesthetic issue, quite frankly. On the commercial industrial side, you've got customers that are using, on average, 200,000 gallons a month. And that's for processing, it's for running their business. It's not because they're watering the lawn necessarily, right? They might be doing that as well, but because of the different use profile, we often see a flat rate. Then the second question is it the right flat rate, right? And so that the fact that it's between your first and your second tier it's probably a little low. I wouldn't say it's dramatically low from what we call the cost of service look at it. Again, if you think about the way that the utility runs, and if the typical household is using about 6,000 gallons or so, for 100 of those, you're going to get 600,000 gallons. You have all the cost associated with 600 accounts, or 100 accounts in that sense. if you have 2 or 3 commercial customers could be using the same amount. And so they don't have the same kind of cost profile with it either, because you're only servicing 2 or 3 accounts as opposed to 100 accounts from a residential standpoint. And so it's common to see, and it's consistent with looking at who's actually causing the cost for the system. It's common to see the commercial and industrial type rates be a little bit lower than the top end. Somewhere in the middle of the residential rates is where it typically falls out. So, you know, when we look at this, the rate plans that we have, that we're showing you tonight, we're keeping the same rate structure. What we're simply doing is saying scenario 1 funds X and scenario 2 funds Y. They fund 2 different levels of capital investment. And we want to talk with you about things like this, of how much are you interested in looking at the structure itself as opposed to just across the board percentage increases. So that's a component of what we need to hear from you tonight. And I would tend to agree that on the face of it, the commercial industrial volume rate's probably a little bit low, and this is something we've talked about with your staff as well. The meter size charges are a little lower than they could be for commercial and industrial as well. So those are 2 components that commercial industrial is probably not quite paying their full cost, which means that residential is paying that extra, right? So you'll see here why it's not 1-to-1. Most of your system is made up out of residential. So $1 saved for commercial and industrial means $1 saved for residential, but it's spread across all of your residential as opposed to, you know, being a 1-for-1 essentially. On the wastewater side, similar situation going on there. We got a base rate of $11 for residential, $25 for commercial and industrial, and the volume rate for commercial and industrial is another one that we'd suggest we look into more closely. Treating commercial sewage actually typically costs more than treating residential sewage. It's just higher strength. There's chemicals. There's tends to be higher suspended solids and all of those sorts of things in it. So we would suggest taking a closer look at that. You also have the graduated tiering system on the wastewater side. However, the first tier goes up to the first 16,000 gallons at $1.52, and then above that it's $1.88 and $2.48. All right, so looking at your comparison for this would be a large residential customer, generally speaking. 10,000 gallons, not huge. Most residential customers will go 10,000 gallons at some point in the year when they're watering outside. But 10,000 gallons of water and wastewater. Right now, that costs your customers $51.45. They're the lowest on our list. You can see their emission is just a little bit higher. Well, it's actually almost 10% higher, 55.25, and the sample average of communities here in the lower valley is 76.19. You're $25 less than the sample average for that same use profile of 10,000 gallons for any one of those different communities. So when we see something like this where it's an outlier essentially on either end, either the high end or the low end, we try to make sure that we understand why. And is there some magic that you found essentially that allows you to run your system that much less than everybody else, or are there some other things driving it? And in talking with your staff and looking at your system, again, it appears that there's likely some deferred maintenance that's been happening that needs to get taken care of sooner rather than later. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about your specific volumes and accounts. So right now, you've got about almost 6,800 residential inside accounts. You do have a couple of outside residential accounts, no commercial outside accounts, I guess. And you do charge a premium for those outside customers. It's very common practice because it does actually cost more to serve outside city customers when you take a look at the risk profile that they provide as well. Total number of customers on the water side, about 7,700. On the wastewater side, about 7,200. That is very common for us to see fewer wastewater accounts than water accounts. Part of that is because sprinklers are only going to be water on the water side, not on the wastewater side. And then you'll see commercial, it's got 533 water accounts, 446 sewer accounts, also pretty typical. A lot of times you'll have individual units within a multi-unit complex, have individual water meters, but the complex itself pays a single sewer charge. So nothing out of the ordinary from what we would expect to see here. When we look at your consumption, your residential inside uses almost 2/3 of your water. And that is one of the reasons why I kind of prefaced that with recognizing that making changes on the commercial side is only going to affect about 20% of your use. That has an impact. It does generate some additional revenue. It enables rate impacts on residential to be a little less, but just recognizing that 2/3 of the use comes from residential as it is. And we expect that to continue. Total use in our, what we call our test year, is just under 800 million gallons. So as we look out and forecast that out over a 10-year period, we expect the 7,700 7,700 accounts today to go up to about 9,000, a little over 9,000. On average, 150 new water accounts per year and 148 new wastewater accounts added into the system. We take all the growth into account as we're working through these financial plans to try and make sure that we're recognizing it. If growth is causing some of the capital improvement plan, we also want to make sure that we're picking up the additional revenue that would be associated with that growth.
Should the city also be looking at maybe installing like the smart meters? You know, because I mean, little that I know, I mean, you're the expert when it comes to that. I know that when they install these smart meters, I mean, the water consumption and the way it reads is going to be so accurate.
Yes.
So should maybe the city start like, you know, looking at trying to maybe start installing it like in these new subdivisions and stuff like that?
Yeah, yes. So for those that may not be as familiar with the concept of these smart meters or automatic meters, they provide a couple of different things. One is it's a more accurate read. Just anytime water meters slow down with age. And so if you're not replacing them regularly, what's happening is your residents aren't getting charged for the full amount of water that goes through the meter. And they don't speed up with age, they slow down. And so anytime you replace a meter, whether it's with a smart meter or just replacing it with an old manual meter, it doesn't matter. It's going to show additional use because it's showing the use that actually goes through the meter. And so recognize that first, that any kind of meter change out or meter replacement program means that most of your customers are going to experience a higher bill. Good for your revenues, can be impactful to your customers in ways that maybe you didn't imagine would necessarily be the case. We've seen oftentimes, charges to customers go up in the range of 10% when they install those kinds of meters. Now, again, all that's doing is reading the water that actually goes through the meter. And so that's water that they're getting for essentially free right now, right? And so that's a component of it to consider as you look at that. The other thing that it does and provides a service to your customers, though, is it provides them a great deal of information about how they use water. We have smart meters in the community that I live in, and I've got an alert set up that if I use over X number of gallons in any particular day, I get an email coming to my phone saying, hey, you're using too much water. And so I can know if I see 500 gallons when I'm typically using 200, I know I got a leak. And I know I got to go find that leak somewhere, and it tells you that day, right? So, so some of the systems are able to do that, and they're able to give your consumers a lot more information about how they use water, and that can help them save water as well. And so And then there's the administrative side of it as well, that allows your billing clerks, your meter readers, all that sort of thing to work in a way that just has a lot more information available to them. And generally speaking, that is a good thing when it comes to billing and operations, and typically it's more efficient, those kinds of aspects to it. So,
Real quick, last week, 2 weeks ago, I was in San Antonio, and my sister, they have the smart meters, right, for the water.
Yep.
And she was telling my brother-in-law, like, hey, between 9 and 10, it's saying we use too much water. Like, go check if we have a leak. Sure enough, they had a leak.
Yep.
You know, on one of the sprinkler systems.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's how accurate it was.
There are systems that get down to the minute. If you're interested in that, you know, most of them do it on a daily basis. SAWS has a great program where it does do it on an hourly basis and can give you those alerts if something looks odd, and it'll alert it.
Yeah.
How many water meters or accounts did you say you had?
About 7,700. Yep, today. And on the wastewater side, about 7,200. Same number of properties being served, just different ways that it's sliced and diced from an account standpoint.
So just based on what we're talking about right now, I'm more than sure that on the other side, that the city is losing out a lot of revenue.
Sure.
With the meters that we have right now, because you just mentioned that, you know, after 10 years, it just slows down. So the reading's not accurate.
Right.
And so we are losing money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, the two ways to account for that essentially is to have meters that are reading accurately, or have rates that are, you know, essentially inflated rates, so that it ends up being rates that are, you know, 10 or 15 or 20% higher per 1,000 gallons than you would otherwise need, recognizing that you know, you're not reading all the gallons that you could be reading. I don't suggest that. I don't think that's a good way to go about it, but
Sure.
right now, you've got old meters and low rates. And you got both, right. Right.
Smart meters, you said
They vary, but yes, they read the actual amount of water going through the meter, which if you haven't replaced meters in a while, it's generally speaking going to be at least 10% difference.
Is there some situations to where an actual smart meter doesn't go up and actually saves the customer as well, correct? I mean, it's twofold, right, depending on,
Yes, it gives the customer more information about how they manage their water use. And so it can be saving in that sense. However, it is very likely to, if they don't make any changes to their behavior and how they water their lawn or do anything else, it's very likely going to show up as a higher bill, simply because it's reading all of the water that goes through the meter. But again, it does enable your customers then to have the information to make choices that affect their bill. Right now, you know, you get a bill once a month and you kind of hope that it's what it usually is. You have no idea what it is if you don't have meters that can help tell you what it's going to be on a regular basis like that.
everyone's turning to smart meters.
Yeah. All right. Moving into build volume forecast, right now you're at, again, just under 800 million gallons for the year. We expect that over the next 10 years to go up to about 878 million gallons, assuming consumption increases at about a 1% annually. All right, let's talk about sort of the key assumptions that we've got. We've got two different scenarios that we're going to present to you tonight. All of the assumptions for the two scenarios are the same except for the amount of debt that the city takes on in order to build capital projects. So everything else cost-wise is the same between the two scenarios. We take your budget, we go through it line by line, and we pull out things like chemicals, and we say, okay, chemicals have been increasing at a far faster pace than inflation. We're going to tack on a premium inflation component to that. Most of your line items, probably 90% of them, we've inflated at between 3% and 4% a year, just kind of keeping up with the regular typical inflation. There are certain line items that we'll pull out because we see the experience, health benefits, electricity, chemicals, some of those kinds of things, construction costs tend to outpace inflation, so we put a premium on those things. The water master plan outlines just about $62 million in CIP projects over the next 10 years. That's almost 35 million on the, 62 million on the water side, almost 35 million on the wastewater side. Total CIP over the next 10 years of almost $97 million. That's a lot of capital for a system this size. There's no question about that. And again, what we wanted to be able to show you tonight were two different scenarios. We're calling scenario 1 100% debt and scenario 2 50% debt. You'll notice that scenario 2 is not quite half of 97 million, and that's because for fiscal 26 we're assuming the same, because those are projects that you've already got underway. After that, it's literally, we're just splitting it down the middle. Everything beyond 2026 is happening. So I won't go through these projects here. This is really just for your packet information. But these are the projects that make up that capital improvement plan of nearly $97 million. And again, capital improvement plans always change over the course of even a rate study. They change weekly. And so, we'll be in communication as we come down closer to an approval. We'll make sure that we've got the latest, best information from your staff on what the capital improvement plan looks like. All right, so under the two different scenarios, again, sort of the tealish color, I guess, is the debt scenario 1, and the more blue is debt scenario 2. Again, you'll see for 2026, we're assuming $4.3 million under both scenarios. Starting in 2027, scenario 2 is simply half of the scenario 1. We're not picking projects as part of this. We're just doing it on a funding level basis. And so this is really an order of magnitude component to the study more than it is here's the specific projects that would get funded under the 50% plan. Under the 100% plan, they all get funded. Under the 50% plan, you'd have to make some choices. We're not going to make those choices for you. But you can see here that starting in 2027, regardless of which scenario, $24 million necessary for the scenario 1, which is the 100% funded, 12 million under scenario 2, and then another 11.2 or 5.6 in 2028, and then it backs off pretty considerably by 29, and then no additional debt by 2030. From a costing perspective, we've assumed all of this to be 30-year level payment debt, 4% interest rates. We can work with your financial advisors to get more detailed on that as well as we get closer to an actual rate plan scenario that we're looking at.
Were our financial advisors present in the meeting when you all met with our staff or no?
No.
When would they present?
We were just gonna be getting information, and then that way we can present to you all
Okay.
the options, and like we mentioned, there's gonna be more current information.
Okay.
He's gonna have to provide.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so scenario 1, scenario 2, there are a lot of numbers on this table. We've highlighted what we think are the most salient ones to kind of be focused on. The only difference is in scenario 1, you'll see your debt service amount goes in 2026 from a little under $1.6 million in debt service payments. Under scenario 1, which is the 100% funded, goes up to 4.1 million by 2035, and it gets there relatively quickly. By 2030, we're already at 4 million. Under scenario 2, the same 1.6 million in 2026, but by 2030, we're looking at 2.7 million as opposed to 3.9. So about a $1.2 million cost difference between these two plans on an annual basis. Same information, just provided in a graph as opposed to in the table. And again, you can see there the black portion of these graphs is the debt service amount. The operating, as I mentioned, that doesn't increase in cost that rapidly. It does increase in cost because of all those inflationary pressures I talked about. Both of these scenarios, again, same numbers are used for everything except for debt service. All right. So let's talk about the specific plans themselves. Scenario one would issue $97 million in debt over the next 10 years. The rate increases necessary to fund all of that are significant. On the water side, it would take about 16% a year for 4 straight years, starting sometime before this summer. We've got it shown as January here, but sometime before this summer to pick up summer use. And then again, we've got October, but that could be January of next year. But essentially annual increases starting before this summer at 16% a year for the next 4 years. And then it backs off and goes down to $4 million because your debt issuances have really backed off by that point as well on the water side. On the wastewater side, 11% for the first 3 years, 8% the 4th year, and 4% the 5th year of the plan. This does require approximately $400,000 of drawing down existing reserves in order to help mitigate that first year. Because we'd be selling a significant amount of debt, $24 million in debt in 2027, we want to try and make sure that we don't spike rates and then, have them up to a level where it's unsustainable. So we're gradually, still 16%, I understand that, or if we didn't use that $400,000, it'd have to be probably closer to 21, 22% in the first year in order to keep your fund balance where it's at today. We've made sure that we've financially modeled out your system. Your fund balance will still be in fine shape. We don't drop below 90-day reserve, all that sort of thing. But we do use a little bit of it in the early years to help mitigate some of the rate impact. We do that in both of these scenarios. The specific rates that we are talking about, and I won't go through all the numbers on this, obviously, but essentially we'd be going from that $12.05 as your base charge up to $13.98 as the base charge for residential with the first adjustment. The second adjustment would take it up to $16.21. That's a 16% increase each year. And you can see the following years after that on the water side. Wastewater side, 11%. And those percentages are applied in these scenarios to the base charge and to all the volume tiers for both residential and commercial. And it's done uniformly. So nobody's getting any different percentage increases under these scenarios. All the same percentage increases. Now again, we think that there's room to look at the way that your commercial is currently being done. And so we could end up with a scenario that has commercial at a higher percentage increase and residential then at a relatively slightly lower percentage increase. That's not going to drop this rate plan down to 5 or 6%. I just want to be clear about that. But it can very likely shave 3 or 4% off of what you're seeing here. We'd have to run those numbers, but we need to look at it and see. You've got enough commercial use at 20% that it can have an impact. It just can't have a dramatic impact on the residential rates.
Well, something small would still be good for residential.
Right. Well, and again, when we look at it, there's a lot of different ways that communities set rates. In fact, I've said that, I said earlier, we've done about 300 of these in the state of Texas. Literally no two are the same. We've done about 600 nationally. No two are the same. Every community does their rates a little bit differently. Typically they all have similar types of structures, but whether it's 4,000 gallons or 6,000 gallons or 12,000 gallons in the first tier or whatever, how much they're trying to get out of their base charge versus out of their volume charge, that differs everywhere. You can attempt to drive some policy with your rate plan. However, our job is to try and look at it and say, okay, who's causing the cost, and therefore who should pay the cost? And then put the decision into your hands to say, here's what it is if everybody is essentially paying their fair share. Now you have the ability to change that a little bit if you want to. I think that commercial is probably underpaying a little bit right now. So there's room to bring them up and still to only get them to the point where they're paying their fair share, and that would have a positive impact on residential.
So let me ask you this. So let's say, for instance, if there's a standard fee that, you know, we decide at using 5,000 gallons per month, right? I'm just throwing that number.
Right.
And we pay so much. So if the consumer uses, let's say an additional 2,000 gallons, is there any way where the system can adjust and charge that individual more?
Yes.
And, you know, since I only use 5,000, I'm only gonna pay this amount, and now the other person, you know, it increases 2,000 more. Well, can we, you know, have the adjustment and have them take the hit of it?
Yes.
Instead of just right across the board, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, yes, and I mean, your system does that today. So if somebody uses 10,000 gallons, 10,000 gallons is what their meter reads. They
Wait,
might be-
I was gonna, yeah,
They might be.
clarify that.
They might be using 11 or 12, but.
Exactly.
If they've got a read of 10,000 gallons, they're paying for 10,000 gallons. And if I've got a read of 4,000 gallons, I'm only paying 4,000 gallons. So that component of it is already in place. Another aspect of that, though, is how much distance is there between your tiers, right? Your residential tiers, where right now, it's a relatively modest increase to that next hit. So your 2 to 11,000 gallons is at, what is that, $1.65 is it today? And then your second tier between 11 and 16,000 gallons goes up by 35 cents to
Correct.
$2. There's likely some room to make some shifts on the higher end of those tiers as well. That separation is probably not driving a lot of conservation behavior, just generally speaking, because there's not enough of a price differential that people really feel it. And so that's another component that we can look at as we start to get into a better idea about what the tolerance is from the commission standpoint, and take a look at that and say, okay, now we can design a rate study or a rate structure that looks at and says, okay, if you're going to be using as a residential, if you're going to be using more than 26,000 gallons, which is probably your top 1.5%, 2% of your bills, you're not going to be paying $3.10. You're going to be paying $5 or $6, something like that. That's not going to generate a lot of revenue to be, you know, generated back through the system, just because there's not a lot of use at those levels. But what it does is it begins to send those pricing signals in a way that's a little bit more consistent with the cost of actually providing a service that everybody can turn on. You want to be able to provide a system that when people turn on the water, it comes on. And in order to do that, you have to take those large users into account. And that's who you're building the system for. So they're causing a lot of cost in the system. You know, at the 310, is that enough of a price signal to try and not have them use that much water, or at least have them paying for the cost of the water that they're using? Probably not. There's probably some more room there as well.
Now, on the wastewater, we have them right now at 140 on tier 1 and tier 2, right?
Yep.
It won't go that much higher than maybe what, 145, 150 on the wastewater on the commercial?
So on the commercial, no, that probably
Can go a little bit.
could go a fair bit higher,
Yeah,
quite
that
frankly.
one you'll see change, right?
Yeah, yep. That one could go a fair bit higher. Whenever we make structural changes like this, I just want to put this out there as a caution, because next time I come down here, we'll have some structural changes to talk about. I'll talk about turning dials. When we have one dial that we're turning, we have a pretty good idea about how customers will react to it. When we have two dials, we've got less idea about how people react to it. We start having 3 or 4 dials that we're turning and changing how they get charged, because they've now got a significantly higher sewer rate, they've got a significantly higher water rate, they got a significantly higher base rate. I'm talking about commercial in this case. We're not sure how they're going to react to that, and so we have to build some back off of use into our model, some sensitivity to say, you might be successful in driving conservation. And if you are, that means you're going to sell fewer gallons. And if you're selling fewer gallons, it means you're not going to be generating the same amount of revenue. So, you know, that's our job to do that, but just recognize the more things you change in a structure, the more likely it is to have outcomes that we can't predict accurately. So that's just risk with restructuring a rate plan. But again, I think there's room to restructure some of this rate plan without making huge changes, And we can phase those in over time as well. They don't all have to be done up front. Anytime there's a really significant change, we try to phase it in over 3 or 5 years, just to try and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to adjust to it. All right. Looking at the base charges and the volume rates and percentage increases, all great and good, but what people care about is what does my bill look like, right? So this bill impact analysis for scenario 1, a 5,000 gallon user is a fairly typical residential user. Between 5 and 10,000 gallons, generally speaking, will be your average use. Right now, a 5,000 gallon user pays $35.60 for water and wastewater services combined. Under scenario 1, that would go up by $4.77 a month, up to $40.37 for a combined water wastewater increase of 13.4% increase on their bill is what they would see. A 10,000 gallon user would be a 13.5% increase, go up by a little less than $7 a month to fund 100% of the CIP, all with debt. On the commercial side, you can see there the percentages are similar, 14%, 13.9%, and the 30,000 gallon user go up by $23 a month, the 60,000 gallon user go up by $37 a month in the first year, and then you can see the following years thereafter as well. All right, so scenario 1, funding 100% of your CIP identified in the master plan, all with debt, 30-year debt at 4%. Scenario 2, again, this is an order of magnitude look, to look at it and say, okay, well, if we can't do all of that, then what would doing roughly half of it look like? The rate increases still need to be fairly significant. Some of this is makeup of those last 17 years that rates haven't changed, and so there's a component of that built into both of these. But the 50% would require 12% on water and 8% on wastewater for the first 4 years on water, first 3 years on wastewater, and then be able to go down to 5% wastewater in year 4, and 4% in water and 3% in wastewater in year 5. This requires about $700,000 worth of drawdown of your fund balance. We're still keeping it healthy, but that's getting thinner at that point. Rate increases are lower. Quite frankly, with some of the adjustments to the commercial that we're talking about, this level of funding for the CIP can probably dip below 10% on residential impact for water. We can probably shave about 2 to 3% by doing some of the other structural changes that we're talking about. But again, recognize anytime you make structural changes, that means that you're impacting some customers differently than how you're impacting other customers. Somebody gets a benefit, it means that somebody else has got to pay that benefit. Again, on the commercial side, I believe your residential is essentially subsidizing your commercial side right now. And so there's room to do that and still all day long say, look, we're just charging the cost of actually providing the service. Same look here at the actual rate plan that would be associated with scenario 2. Again, 12% water for the first 4 years, 8% wastewater for the first 3 years, and you can see how that shakes out in the actual rate plan itself. And then the bill impact analysis to kind of keep it into perspective. 5,000 gallon user would go up a little less than 10% on their bill, $3.53 a month. And that's the other thing we put the percentages in here because we think it's important to just be transparent about that. But you've got the lowest rates around. So a 10% increase for you is like a 5% increase for Harley, dollar-wise, right? So kind of keep that in perspective as well. We want to make sure that we're looking at both the percentage and the actual number of dollars. So again, a 5,000 gallon user, 9.9% increase, but it is $3.53. Keep that in perspective. 10,000 gallon user would be a little over $5 a month difference for about a 10% increase. And then that carries out over the first roughly 4 years, and then backs down to about $2 to $3 a month for 10,000 gallon user. And finally, we'll take a look at some comparisons here. This compares your current in yellow scenario 2 in the blue and scenario 1 in the teal, to the area rates today. Scenario 1 and scenario 2 rates are as of 2030. So if nobody changed their rates for the next 5 years, nobody else but you, you'd still be lower than Mercedes, Brownsville, and Lafayette. You'd be about at, under either scenario. Under scenario 2, you'd be about at McAllen and Donna, a little above Harlingen, a little bit above FAR. I can tell you that most of those communities are going to be increasing their rates because we do several of the rate studies. And they're on plans to increase their rates each year. So if they didn't, you'd still be middle of the pack, roughly. If you do the 100%, you'd be on the higher end, but you still wouldn't be the high 5 years from now, even if nobody else changes their rates. We also took a look at assuming just 3% increase for everybody else. I don't think that's what it's actually going to be. In fact, I know that's not what it's going to be for some of these, because again, we've done their rate plans. But if we just assume 3%, you can see that the scenario 1 at the end of 2030, and then everybody else at the end of 2030 with a 3% increase, that would put you essentially at McAllen and Donna, roughly. The 50% you'd still be in the lowest, third, roughly, of the rates with the 50% plan of scenario 2. And again, we expect many of these utilities to be increasing at least 3%, and generally speaking, 5 to 6 is what we see in the industry. Now, the Valley has some of the lowest rates in the state. Your cost of water is relatively low. And so that's helpful. But at the end of the day, either one of these plans at this level of funding for the CIP is going to require some significant increases. We haven't shown you here a plan that doesn't fund any capital and how much that would cost, but there would still be increases necessary. Probably, I'm just going to ballpark it, probably 8-ish% increases over the next couple of years. Could back off faster than building capital. But there's really not a scenario in which we would suggest that you don't raise rates, even if you don't build anything.
Necessity.
It's a necessity.
Bottom line.
Yes.
Let me ask you this, and I guess this is, first of all, thank you so much for this information that you're providing to us. Obviously, with population growing, everything adjusts, and so we need to grow with it too. But has there been like any cities to where they kind of hold off and don't want to increase rates to where the state comes in, knocking on the door and telling them, look, you better do something about it because X and Y and Z can happen. Has that ever happened in your experience? You don't have to say the city or anything like that.
I won't say the city, but
No.
I'll give you a very real scenario from this past summer. I got a call in June from a financial advisor in the state of Texas that said, we've got a client that the Water Development Board wants to offer some grant money to. However, the Water Development Board will not grant them if they do not raise their rates up to a point of where they're covering the cost of service.
I knew it.
And that required roughly a 20% increase in their rates to get to just where they were able to pay back. What that unlocked for them, however, was $25 million worth of grants from the Texas Water Development Board. If they had not raised their rates by, again, that's a hard swallow at 20%, and that was year 1, and year 2 wasn't much better than that. It was a little better, but it wasn't much. They wouldn't have had access to $25 million worth of grant funding. Now, that's an anomaly, but that's a real situation that happened in the state of Texas this past year. And yes, the Water Development Board, when they're looking at providing grant funding, they will look at, do you have rates in place, and are your elected officials willing to charge rates that are required to fund these kind of projects and to keep your system operating efficiently. Second, there are fewer circumstances. And I bring that one up because it's fresh on my mind, but then also because that's not an uncommon scenario, particularly where the Water Development Board has some money that they had allocated to some other projects. Those projects didn't get done or came in under budget or whatever the case may be, and they're looking for a place to grant money to, and they start going down the list and saying, here's, the next 3 that didn't get funded under the initial scoring, the next 3, we could fund those projects now because we've got some additional money available. But those organizations haven't gone through the vetting to make sure that they've got rates in place to support paying back, because those typically come with a portion that's forgivable and a portion that needs to be paid back at a low interest rate. But they've got to have rates in place to do that, or the Water Development Board won't grant the money.
So there's a possibility that it can affect us.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
Not get funded.
Yes, absolutely.
got it.
Yeah, again, that's a very real scenario that
And
happened.
it just
6
popped in
months
my
ago.
mind, I was just curious if
Yeah.
that ever happened.
Yep.
And you pretty much explained to us that it can happen.
Yes.
But we won't get help through the Texas Water Development Board.
Right.
Okay. When are we supposed to meet again in reference to, or,
Well, so again, what we've given you here is sort of 2 ideas of not making any structural changes, but just to begin to give you an idea of, okay, funding at this level is going to cost roughly X, right? We can tweak some components of the rate structure that are generally speaking going to make this better for residential, because all the reasons with commercial that I already talked about. What we need to know, and I think what your staff needs to know, is there's a variety of different ways of kind of going down to getting to the point of where, okay, we got something to vote on. You can tell us what you think this community will absorb. How many percentage or how many dollars on an average bill? And then we can design a plan that shows, that gets to that, and we'll be able to say, and so that's going to allow you to fund X amount of capital improvements. Anything above that, you're going to have to get grants for, you're going to have to, whatever. Having that kind of plan in place speaks to the Texas Water Development Board.
gotcha.
Or you can say, we got to fund $50 million worth of projects, we got to adopt the rates that are necessary to fund $50 million worth of projects. Either one, we can design a rate plan to get there. Again, I've said it 2 or 3 times, there's not a rate plan that doesn't include increases, even if you don't build anything. And so to me, it comes down to how much do you think this community can afford to build within the next 5 to 10 year time frame, and we can build a rate structure that goes around that. You've seen here that building roughly $50 million worth of projects over the next 10 years costs about 12% for the next couple of years. Building $100 million worth of projects costs about 16%. Keep those rough numbers in mind. Think about it, communicate with your staff, let us know what you'd like to see, and we can turn another scenario around now very quickly. You tell us X, Y, and Z, and we'll start working on some of the commercial as well to say, okay, here's ideally how we think it really ought to be structured on the commercial side and how much that helps the residential side.
For sure.
And so we'll start working that just based on the commentary that I've heard tonight.
Yeah, so
And-
my advice to you is, start, I guess,
Yep.
looking into the
Yep.
commercial and on that side, because that was the first thing I noticed when we
Yep.
opened our packet. I was like, wait a minute, that's a little too low, you know what I'm
Yep.
saying?
Yeah,
But I think this is more of just a comment for the commission and our staff. I think we need to get together again, amongst us and really dissect these different scenarios and see what we can figure out and see how much, the citizen can take as far as what we're looking at, the numbers. So I don't know when you guys want to set something up again.
Financial advisor.
Yes, Bob.
Yeah, with Bobby, right?
Yes.
So that's why, but this time we need
See where
to.
we're at.
Yes, exactly. So I guess you want to get with Brenda, ask and see what would be a good date to meet again, without Mr. Jason. Yeah, so we can just kind of discuss this and get with the commission, however you want to, and figure out a date,
And-
And so let me ask you this, so how soon do we have to decide and maybe in the future put it on the agenda? Is there like a time frame, or does the state require?
No, there's not a state requirement. You have jurisdiction over your rates.
Okay.
March is what we're looking.
March so again, these rate plans assume you've got something in place before this summer. If it goes beyond this summer, you're gonna
No. Yeah.
have to double the rate increase.
I got you. I got you.
Will the council be meeting with another company, or is he the only one? I'm just wondering if y'all are having a workshop. What did you say?
No, we're gonna
He's
have.
the only one doing the study.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's the only one doing the study.
Yes,
He's,
Yes.
yes.
yeah.
No, we wouldn't pay two companies to do the same study.
Right. Any questions?
Yeah, I have two questions. One, I know Mayor, question about the financial advisors being involved in the meeting, but they weren't. Now, I'm looking at the projects and the cost. Were engineers involved in this number, getting these numbers?
Those numbers were obtained from the engineers, the new
From the
plan.
engineers.
We still need to have another workshop with them. They did set one up, but it was during the day. What was it about?
What
November.
engineering company was involved?
TriMet.
TriMet? Okay.
And he was giving the presentation. I pretty much told him, I said, look, I think some of these information that you're passing along, I said the commission needs to be present. Am I correct?
And who selected the engineering company to partake in this?
I have no idea.
Yeah,
Who did?
I guess, past director.
Hold on.
The past director, I guess, Juan Carlos, because when I got here, they already had like 80%, 90% of the master plan.
It's in the,
Done.
Yeah, I got a copy here. I bring it in case you want to see it.
so how old is this plan?
No, it's the current one. It's the
Current plan?
Yes, sir.
We already paid for that? We're not incurring
No,
invoice for
sir.
this.
I think it's already been complete,
Yeah.
yes. See, and they still went out with the presentation as far as what he was presenting, but I did advise him that it was best for you all to be present. So there's gonna be one coming up.
The second question that I had, I know because you're doing the study for us, based on the numbers that they gave you. On these studies, do you all ever take into consideration the annual average household income and how it's gonna impact the residence itself?
We can do that, yes.
And this one is not, it wasn't done.
We haven't done that at
Can
this
you
point.
do that?
Yeah,
Can you
absolutely.
include that? Yeah, I would like to see how it would impact the residents.
Yes.
Thank you. You got a question?
I guess you say we'll have different options. We're gonna create different scenarios and options for.
Yeah, so I think the next step will be, again, to work with the staff, get additional commentary that you have, pass along through the staff to us. Again, we can work with your financial advisors. We do that all the time at this stage of the studies, typically to say, okay, we understand the cost dynamics well enough, and the council desires well enough to realize we're ready to put a sort of a final proposed plan together. That might come back as one, it might come back as two alternatives. It'll just kind of depend on if it seems like we're kind of narrowing into a single alternative, that's what we'll bring back to you. Otherwise, it may still be two. But we try not to bring back more than two alternatives simply because it's just, it gets to be noise at that point. And we've worked with Bobby and his group for years. We're well acquainted with them.
The workshop?
No, it was just a presentation. The workshop, it's gonna be set up with the commission.
The utility department.
Utilities.
For staff.
For staff?
It was not a workshop.
No,
It was
no, it was
the
a-
engineer with the utility director.
Correct.
That was it. It was not a workshop, it was not a meeting, nothing like that transpired.
No, it already been approved.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember the amount?
No, he's asking the amount.
Right, I'm asking the same question. Do you remember?
I don't recall offhand. I don't.
We can check tomorrow.
He should,
Yeah.
Yes.
Chief will have the answer.
Anything else? Is there a motion adjourned?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned at 7:05 PM. Thank you, guys.